The sky that evening burned like an old wound. A western dusk bled across the horizon, painting the plains in copper and crimson. The air smelled of dust and sage, heavy with the silence that comes before nightfall. Elias McCraw guided his horse slow along the trail home, reins loose in his hand, his eyes hollow with the sore weariness that comes from years of talking to no one but cattle and wind. He wasn't looking for anything. Not trouble, not company. Only the sound of hooves and the low whistle of his breath. Yet the land has a way of offering what a man does not ask for. Under the cottonwoods near the creek bed, he saw it, a shape that swayed against a fire-colored sky. At first his mind refused it, called a rag, a broken limb, some trick of light. But the horse shied and snorted, hoofs clattering on stone. Then Elias saw the truth. A child hung there, thin body limp, rope tight about her neck, bare feet swaying inches from the earth. A wooden sign, nailed crude to the trunk above her head, flapped in the hot breeze. White man don't forgive. The word seemed carved not with knife, but with hatred itself. Elias was off his horse before thought could form. His boots sank in the loam as he reached for his hunting knife. The rope fibers were swollen with rain, rough against his palm. He cut once, hard. The girl fell into his arms, light as an empty sack. She wasn't dead. Her chest rose shallow, her throat raw and bruised with the rope's angry kiss. Her wrists were bound, blood dry black at the edges of the twine. Her dark hair clung to her face, and her eyes were closed, but lashes trembled like reeds in wind. Elias pressed 2 fingers beneath her jaw. A pulse, fragile as a moth's wing, but there. He let out a sound, half sigh, half prayer, though he'd forgotten the last time he'd prayed. The sign creaked above them, shifting in the branches as though mocking him. Elias did not look up. He only gathered the girl, her body cold against his chest, and carried her to the horse. The ride back to the ranch was long and silent. The girl's weight was nearly nothing, yet Elias felt heavy as stone. Each hoofbeat echoed against the canyon walls like judgment. He thought of the town, of faces turned to stone when they'd seen him before, widower, land-rich but heart-poor, never smiling, never belonging. They had once whispered of his wife's death in childbirth, God's punishment. Now they would whisper again. He brought a cursed girl home. But he rode on. The cabin welcomed him with familiar loneliness. The fire pit cold, the air faint with old leather and horsehair. He laid the girl on his bed, her small frame swallowed by the rough wool blanket. He lit a lantern, shadows crawling up the walls like silent watchers. Her breathing rattled. Elias fetched water, dribbled it past her lips. She coughed, a sound so sharp it seemed to tear her throat. Her eyes opened, dark, wide, filled with terror. She jerked back, scrambling weakly against the wall. "Easy now," Elias murmured, voice low, like soothing a spook colt. His hands he kept wide, palms open. "Ain't no harm here." She did not answer, only stare at him as if waiting for another rope, another hand to strike. Her breath came quick and shallow. Elias fetched a piece of bread, left it on the table. He did not press her. He simply set water near, then backed away, taking the chair by the hearth. The fire crackled alive under his flint, spilling orange warmth into the silence. Hours stretched. Elias dozed, head dipped forward, until the sound of crumbs breaking stirred him. The girl ate in tiny bites, eyes darting to him between each chew. It was not trust, but it was not rejection either. By morning, word had spread. Elias had carried the girl to the well to wash her wounds, and a ranch hand riding by had seen. By noon, Sheriff Clayton Hurst was at the door, boots striking the floorboards with the confidence of a man who carried the town's judgment in his badge. "You best think twice, McCraw," the sheriff said, hat dripping dust, eyes sharp. "That girl's a curse you can't wash off. Whatever trouble strung her up come knocking on your door. Best to leave her be." Elias stood in the doorway, one hand on the frame. "She's a child. She's Apache," Hurst spat, "and that makes her trouble, same as rattlers in the grass." Elias's jaw tightened. He did not answer. Silence was his only weapon. The sheriff leaned in closer. "Don't say I didn't warn you." His boots clicked away, leaving behind the scent of dust and threat. Inside, the girl sat small at the table, watching through her hair. Elias met her gaze for a heartbeat. Shame pressed heavy on him, not for keeping her, but for living in a world where kindness had to be hidden like contraband. That night, Elias worked the leather straps of an old saddle by lantern glow. The girl sat on the floor, knees drawn up, silent. Then, without sound, she leaned forward and with one finger traced symbols into the dirt. 2 curved lines meeting. Elias paused. He recognized them from old stories told by hands on the trail. Apache signs. River. Home. He looked up, and for the first time she met his eyes. Her stare was neither soft nor grateful, but it was alive. Something in Elias's chest shifted, like a door cracked open in a long-abandoned house. The rope scar around her neck was still raw, but in her gaze he saw something that refused to be broken. And in that moment, beneath the flicker of the lantern, the lonely rancher and the girl no one forgave shared a silence that did not wound, but healed. Smoke lifted from the chimney like a ribbon of gray prayer, unraveling into the cold morning sky. Inside the cabin, 2 lives moved in rhythm not yet harmonious, but no longer discordant, like 2 strings plucked on different notes, learning how to hum together. The girl, Ayoka, rose before dawn. Her steps were soft as wind, her silence steady. She ground corn with the patience of one who had known hunger too well. Elias McCraw repaired tack in the corner, the leather creaking beneath his callous hands. They did not speak, but the hush between them was no longer made of fear. It was made of listening. Elias noticed the way she moved through the rooms, her touch light but certain, as though she'd been raised to find dignity in every small act. Folding a blanket, tending the hens, mending the edge of her own torn dress. These were not the motions of a child begging for pity. They were the motions of someone who refused to vanish. One afternoon, Elias saddled his horse for town. Ayoka followed without asking, her dark eyes unreadable, the scar around her neck hidden by her hair. He almost told her to stay. He could already hear the whispers waiting, but something in her stare told him she was done hiding. The general store was busy, flour dust catching in the air, voices sharp as iron nails. As Elias pushed open the door, the room shifted. Men lowered their voices. Women looked away, but not before their eyes dragged across Ayoka, like knives. Lord above, Maeve Hollister murmured loud enough for all to hear. He's brought the savage child here. A man spat into the sawdust. Another tugged his own daughter closer, as if Ayoka carried plague. Sheriff Clayton Hurst was there too, leaning against the counter, arms crossed. His voice slid into the room like oil. You're choosing her over your own kind, McCraw. Over good neighbors who kept you fed when your cattle near starved last winter. Elias's jaw worked. His hands gripped the flour sack he'd come for. When he spoke, his words were low but steady as stone. Ain't much kindness left to choose from, Sheriff. A hush fell. The sheriff's lips curled. But Elias turned, the girl close at his side, and walked out into the blaze of daylight without another word. On the ride home, Elias did not look at Ayoka, but he felt the way her shoulders eased just slightly, as though his defiance had built a wall where she might stand safe for a moment. Nights were where the truest bonds grew. The fire cracked and whispered in the hearth, and Elias would murmur small tales, not grand stories, but the quiet kind only a lonely man tells. He spoke of cattle trails where the stars were so thick you could forget the world below. He spoke of his wife, her laugh like creek water, her death like a canyon no bridge could cross. Ayoka listened. Sometimes her lips moved, humming songs older than the land itself. Apache tunes carried low and steady, twining with the crackle of fire. She never translated them, but Elias didn't need the words. He heard the ache, the endurance, the memory of hands that once braided her hair and voices now gone to dust. But trust does not grow straight. It bends, it falters. One evening, Elias returned from the pasture to find the cabin empty, his breath caught, panic, sharp as a blade. He searched the barn, the coop, the cottonwoods. At last he found her by the riverbank, knees drawn up, staring at something clutched tight in her hands. The wooden sign, "White Man Don't Forgive." It must have been torn down and carried here by floodwaters. She held it as though it was both wound and proof. Her lips moved, barely a whisper. They never forgive. Elias's chest burned. He crouched beside her, mud soaking his knees, rain beginning to spit from the clouds above. For a long moment, he could not speak. Words were slippery things, and he had never been good with them. At last he said, voice raw, "Then let me." One man's forgiveness is a start. The river swelled with the storm. Ayoka did not answer, but she let the sign go. It drifted downstream, swallowed by the current, until it was gone. After that night, something quiet shifted. Ayoka began weaving small bracelets from horsehair, her fingers quick and patient. She left them on the workbench where Elias mended saddles. One morning he found a thin braid looped carefully, tied in a knot meant not to break. Without a word, he slipped it over his wrist, wore it to the fields, to the market, to his bed. He never spoke of it, but every time the cord brushed against his skin, it felt like a vow. The town did not forget. Whispers turned to stares, stares to muttered curses. Men spat when Elias passed. One neighbor, Jonas Pike, who had once shared whiskey with him, now crossed the street to avoid him. And yet Elias found he cared less with each passing day. The girl's presence filled the cabin in ways silence alone never had. There were mornings where her humming lifted with the dawn, and evenings where her laughter, short, sudden, startled even herself, fell like rain on parched earth. Elias began to think, though he never said aloud, that perhaps loneliness had always been waiting for this moment, for someone who carried scars that matched his own. The storm came on a night heavy with heat. Thunder rolled across the plains like drums of war. Lightning split the cottonwoods white. Elias bolted the door, the cabin trembling under the sky's anger. Then, over the roar, he heard another sound, distant at first, then closer. Hooves, dozens of them, and voices, harsh and drunken, carried by the wind. He stepped to the window. Out on the ridge, torches burned against the black. A crowd of riders, men with their faces twisted by fear disguised as righteousness. Ayoka stood behind him, eyes wide. In her hand she clutched the horsehair bracelet he wore, as if it could anchor her. The storm and the men arrived together. Judgment had come to his door. The storm tore across the land with the fury of a wounded god. Rain lashed sideways, rattling the cabin shutters, while thunder cracked so loud it seemed the sky itself might split. But louder still were the hoofbeats, dozens of riders pressing through the mud, torches flaring against the black. Elias McCraw stood on his porch, coat heavy with rain, rifle in hand. His hair clung to his brow, water running in rivers down his face. Before him, shadows on horseback gathered like vultures circling a carcass. Sheriff Clayton Hurst rode at their front, hat brim dripping. He shouted over the storm, voice sharp as a whip. "Hand her over, Elias. Hand the Apache girl to us, or we'll hang you next to her." The word struck like iron. Ayoka, inside the doorway, froze. She held the horsehair bracelet tight in her palm, trembling but upright. Her scar, raw around her throat, seemed to burn again in memory of the rope. Elias's voice, low but steady, cut through the rain. "You already hung her once. She still breathes. You won't take that again." The mob surged closer, mud splattering their boots, torches hissing under the rain. Lightning carved white scars across the sky, illuminating their faces. Some twisted in rage, others uneasy, as though the storm itself questioned their purpose. Elias raised his rifle, not aimed at them, at the sky. He fired, the crack rolling into thunder. The mob flinched. "This is my land," he growled. "And under this roof, no rope will ever rule again." Behind him, the door creaked. Ayoka stepped out into the storm, barefoot, drenched, trembling, but she stood beside him. The torchlight flickered across her face, across the scar on her neck, across her eyes that refused to bow. In her hands, she carried the sign, "White man don't forgive." Her fingers shook as she held it out, rain dripping from its edges. Then she dropped it into the mud at their feet. Elias looked at her, then down at the sign. Slowly, he lowered his rifle, picked up the axe leaning by the porch. He handed it to her. Ayoka lifted it, arms quivering with effort, and swung. The wood split in two, the crack echoing louder than thunder. Together, she and Elias struck again and again, until the hateful sign lay shattered and drowned in mud. A silence fell over the mob. The storm still raged, torches hissed, horses stamped nervously, but no one moved forward. Something had shifted, something larger than any rifle could command. The girl who should have been dead stood tall, her hand still gripping the axe, her chest rising in defiance. The rancher who should have been broken stood beside her, no longer lonely, but rooted as if the cottonwoods themselves had taken flesh. Jonas Pike, one of the riders, lowered his torch first. His eyes darted away, shame burning hotter than flame. Another man spat into the mud, muttering, "Ain't worth it." One by one, they turned their horses. Sheriff Hurst cursed, his voice bitter, but even he knew the storm had already scattered them. Not the one in the sky, but the storm that had cracked inside their hearts. He yanked his reins, retreating into the rain. Elias and Ayoka remained, two figures carved against the tempest, the broken sign in pieces at their feet. Hours later, the storm eased. Dawn crept over the plains, pale gold washing the world clean. The ranch stood quiet, the only sound the drip of rain from the eaves. Inside, the fire burned low. Elias sat in the chair by the hearth, soaked clothes dry on the rack. Across from him, Ayoka curled near the warmth, her face half hidden in the blanket he'd wrapped around her shoulders. For a long while, neither spoke. Then she lifted her gaze, eyes dark but clear, and whispered, "Home's what we build, not what they give." Elias's throat tightened. His hand, callous and awkward, rested on his knee. "Then I'll build it with you." The words lingered in the air, not grand, not poetic, but true. Ayoka reached into the blanket and drew out another horsehair bracelet. She crossed the floor and tied it around his wrist with hands that no longer trembled. The knot held fast. At sunrise, the cottonwoods shimmered with dew. Ayoka stepped into the wet grass, her braid heavy with rain. She hung her bracelets on the branches, one by one, each loop swaying gently in the breeze. Nooses no longer, prayers instead. Elias watched from the porch, arms folded, the warmth of something unfamiliar spreading in his chest. Hope, maybe, or kinship, or the quiet miracle of a curse broken by the stubbornness of two souls who refuse to surrender. Closing reflection to the reader. So, friend, if ever the world hangs its sign above you, declare you unforgiven. If shame grips your throat and whispers you are nothing, remember this night. Remember a rancher who chose mercy over fear, and a girl who split her noose into prayers. Forgiveness need not come from all the world. Sometimes one soul's steadfast kindness is enough to turn gallows into shelter. And sometimes the smallest hands can teach the largest hearts what it means to stand tall.